Jonathan Hart had always been a man who valued hard work and dedication. As the CEO of one of the largest restaurant chains in the country, he sat at the top of a towering empire that spanned cities and employed thousands of people. Yet despite his success, something gnawed at him, a lingering question about whether the policies he implemented from his polished office truly reflected the reality faced by those working on the front lines. Were his employees thriving under his leadership, or were they merely surviving? It was this curiosity that led Jonathan to make a bold decision. He would step out of his corner office and into the shoes of an ordinary worker. To pull off this plan, Jonathan needed to disappear, for a while at least. With help from a trusted assistant, he crafted a new identity for himself. Gone were the tailored suits and expensive watches. Instead, he donned faded jeans, scuffed sneakers, and a plain t-shirt. A fake mustache completed the look, making him almost unrecognizable. For added authenticity, he even practiced speaking with a slight accent, ensuring no one would suspect his true identity. When he looked in the mirror, Jonathan barely recognized himself. But deep down, he felt excited. This wasn't just an experiment, it was an opportunity to see the world through someone else's eyes. The chosen location for his undercover mission was a small-town branch of his restaurant chain, far removed from the glitz and glamour of corporate headquarters. The restaurant was bustling, serving everything from hearty breakfasts to late-night snacks. Here, the staff worked tirelessly, their days filled with orders, spills, and endless chatter. To blend in, Jonathan introduced himself as Jack, claiming to be a recent college dropout looking for temporary work. His story seemed believable enough, and after a brief interview, he was handed an apron and assigned to the kitchen team. From day one, Jonathan threw himself into the job. He chopped vegetables, washed dishes, and even helped pack takeout orders during peak hours. At first, it was overwhelming. His hands ached, his back hurt, and the pace was relentless. But what surprised him most was how much he enjoyed it. There was a sense of camaraderie among the staff, a shared bond forged through long hours and hard work. They joked around, teased each other, and supported one another when things got tough. Jonathan found himself laughing more than he had in years. Among the staff, there was one person who stood out to him, Mia. She was a waitress in her mid-20s with a warm smile and an infectious laugh. Despite the chaos of the restaurant, she moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays of food with ease. Customers loved her, and her co-workers respected her. What intrigued Jonathan most, however, was her quiet determination. No matter how busy things got, she never complained. Even when customers snapped at her or sent food back, she handled it all with grace and professionalism. Over time, Jonathan began to notice little details about Mia. Her uniform was always clean and pressed, but her shoes were worn down, the soles peeling away. She brought her own lunch every day, packing simple meals like peanut butter sandwiches or leftover rice. On some days, she didn't eat at all, skipping breaks to keep up with the rush. When asked why, she'd simply shrug and say she wasn't hungry, but Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. One evening after closing time, Jonathan stayed behind to mop the floors. Most of the staff had already left, including Mia, but as he stepped outside to empty the trash, he paused. In the dim light of the parking lot, he saw a figure crouched beside the dumpster. It was Mia. She was rummaging through the trash bags filled with unsold food from the day. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she didn't want anyone to see her. Jonathan's heart sank as he watched her unwrap a discarded sandwich and place it carefully into a paper bag. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away before standing up and walking toward her car. For a moment, Jonathan stood frozen, unable to process what he had just witnessed. This woman, who worked so hard every single day, was reduced to eating scraps from the trash just to survive. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. How could this happen? How could someone who gave so much to the company end up in such a desperate situation? Questions swirled in his mind, but one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore what he had seen. Something needed to change, and he was going to be the one to make it happen. That night, as Jonathan drove home, he replayed the scene over and over, in his head. He thought about Mia's laughter, her kindness, her resilience, and then he thought about the stark contrast between her reality and the luxurious life he lived. The guilt weighed heavily on him. For years, he had focused on profits and growth, believing that success trickled down to everyone. But now, standing face to face with the truth, he realized how wrong he had been. Success meant nothing if it came at the expense of those who made it possible. Determined to set things right, Jonathan knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would change not only Mia's life, but countless others. The image of Mia by the dumpster haunted Jonathan long after that fateful night. It replayed in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off, each frame etched with sadness and desperation. He tried to focus on his tasks at the restaurant, stacking plates, wiping tables, or chopping vegetables. But his thoughts kept drifting back to her. Who was she really? What had driven her to such a heartbreaking situation? The questions gnawed at him, refusing to let go. He knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. If he wanted answers, he would have to dig deeper. Over the next few days, Jonathan made it a point to spend more time around Mia. At first, he was cautious, not wanting to seem too nosy or suspicious. After all, he was supposed to be Jack, the new guy trying to earn his keep, not some curious outsider prying into her personal life. So, he started small, striking up casual conversations during breaks or while they worked side by side. He complimented her efficiency as a waitress, asking how she managed to handle so many tables without breaking a sweat. She laughed softly, brushing off his praise with a modest smile. "It's just practice," she said. "You get used to it after a while." As the days passed, their conversations grew longer and more meaningful. Jonathan learned that Mia wasn't just any ordinary waitress. She carried responsibilities far beyond her years. One evening, as they sat together on a bench outside the restaurant, sharing a quiet moment before the dinner rush, Mia opened up about her family. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but there was strength in her words. She explained how her parents had died unexpectedly in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving her as the sole guardian of her 2 younger siblings, Lila, who was 12, and Ethan, who was 10. "I didn't have a choice," Mia admitted, staring down at her hands. "Someone had to take care of them. My grandparents are elderly and we don't have other relatives nearby. I dropped out of college to work full-time because, well, bills don't stop coming, you know." Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if she had accepted her fate long ago. But Jonathan could hear the pain beneath the surface, the weight of sacrifices, made too soon, dreams put on hold indefinitely. He nodded sympathetically, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "That must be tough," he said gently. "How do you manage everything?" Mia shrugged, forcing a smile. "It's not easy, but we make it work. I pick up extra shifts here whenever I can, and sometimes neighbors help out with babysitting. We're surviving, I guess, that's what matters. Surviving." The word echoed in Jonathan's ears, sharp and bitter. Surviving shouldn't be the goal. It should be thriving. Yet here was Mia, working herself to exhaustion, barely scraping by and still finding ways to provide for her siblings. It was humbling, infuriating even, to think that someone so young was carrying such an immense burden alone. He wanted to ask her more, about her hopes, her fears, her plans for the future, but he held back, sensing that pushing too hard might overwhelm her. Despite her brave exterior, Jonathan noticed cracks in Mia's armor. There were moments when she seemed distant, lost in thought, as if the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. Other times, she appeared physically drained, her movements slower than usual, her laughter quieter. Once, during a particularly busy lunch shift, he saw her stumble slightly while carrying a tray of drinks. When he rushed over to help, she waved him off, insisting she was fine. But her pale face told a different story. Determined to piece together the bigger picture, Jonathan began observing the restaurant's operations more closely. He paid attention to how leftover food was handled, noticing that perfectly edible meals were often tossed into trash bags at the end of the day. Why, don't we donate this stuff? He asked one of the cooks during cleanup. The man shrugged indifferently. Company policy, he replied. Can't risk liability if someone gets sick. Jonathan frowned, puzzled. Liability? Was that really more important than feeding people in need? He filed the information away, realizing it was yet another piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just Mia struggling. There were likely others like her both inside and outside the restaurant who could benefit from those leftovers. The idea of throwing away perfectly good food while employees went hungry felt wrong on every level. One evening, after everyone else had left, Jonathan decided to confront Mia directly. He approached her as she was clocking out, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Hey, Mia," he began, his voice low and hesitant. I saw you the other night by the dumpster." Mia froze, her eyes widening in shock. For a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, unsure of what to say or do. Then, slowly, her expression shifted to one of resignation. She sighed deeply, leaning against the wall. "I figured you'd find out eventually," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. "Look, I'm sorry if it freaked you out. I didn't mean for anyone to see me." "It's not your fault," Jonathan said quickly, his tone firm but gentle. I want to understand. Why are you doing this? You shouldn't have to live like this." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to stay composed. "Because I don't have a choice," she whispered. "My paycheck barely covers rent and groceries. Sometimes, when things get tight, I skip meals so Lila and Ethan can eat. And then, when I'm really desperate, I look through the trash. It's stupid, I know, but it's better than letting them go hungry." Her words hit Jonathan like a punch to the chest. He had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed aloud made it undeniable. This was happening right under his nose, in his own company, and he hadn't even realized it. The injustice of it all burned inside him, fueling a growing sense of urgency. He couldn't sit idly by while Mia and others suffered silently. Something had to change, and he was going to be the one to make it happen. That night, as Jonathan drove home, his mind raced with ideas. He thought about Mia's courage, her resilience, and the love she had for her siblings. He thought about the wasted food, the outdated policies, and the countless lives affected by decisions made in boardrooms far removed from reality. Most of all, he thought about the power he held as CEO, the ability to create real, lasting change. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for what was right. Whatever it took, he vowed to ensure no one ever had to eat out of a dumpster again. The next morning, Jonathan woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation with Mia had shaken him to his core, but it also lit a fire within him, a determination to expose the flaws in his company and fix them. He knew that what he had witnessed wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of deeper systemic issues. Policies designed to protect profits were failing the very people who kept the business running, and as the CEO, it was his responsibility to address these problems head-on. Before diving into action, Jonathan needed more evidence. He couldn't walk into a boardroom and accuse his executives of neglecting employees based solely on his observations, as Jack. So over the next few days, he continued working undercover at the restaurant, quietly gathering information. He spoke to other staff members during breaks, asking casual questions about their lives and struggles. To his dismay, he discovered that Mia's situation wasn't unique. Many employees juggled multiple jobs, relied on food banks, or skipped meals to make ends meet. Some admitted they avoided taking sick days because they couldn't afford to lose even a single paycheck. One particularly eye-opening moment came when he overheard two kitchen workers discussing leftover food. "It's such a waste," one of them muttered as they tossed perfectly good burgers into a trash bag. "We could feed half the neighborhood with this stuff." The other worker shrugged. "Yeah, but you know the rules. Can't risk it." Jonathan clenched his fists in frustration. Here was another glaring example of how outdated policies prioritized liability over humanity. Surely there had to be a way to safely redistribute excess food without putting the company at risk. He made a mental note to look into existing programs that donated surplus meals to shelters and charities. If other businesses could do it, why couldn't his? As the week went on, Jonathan grew closer to Mia. Their conversations became more frequent, filled with laughter and shared stories. He found himself looking forward to their talks, not just because they gave him insight into her world, but because she inspired him. Despite everything she faced, Mia remained optimistic and kind-hearted. She often spoke fondly of her siblings, sharing funny anecdotes about Lila's school projects or Ethan's obsession with dinosaurs. These glimpses of joy reminded Jonathan of what truly mattered: family, community, and compassion. But beneath her cheerful exterior, Jonathan saw cracks forming. One afternoon, Mia called in sick for the first time since he'd started working there. When she returned the following day, her usual energy was noticeably absent. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she moved slower than usual. Concerned, Jonathan approached her during a rare lull in the shift. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't look so good." Mia forced a weak smile. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "Just tired, I guess. Lila's been feeling under the weather, and I stayed up late taking care of her. It's nothing serious." Jonathan nodded, but his heart ached. How much longer could she keep going like this? Every day she poured herself into her work and her family, leaving little room for rest or self-care. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the system kept pushing her down. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't sustainable. Determined to uncover the full scope of the problem, Jonathan decided to investigate the financial side of things. After clocking out for the night, he drove back to his penthouse apartment and booted up his laptop. Disguised once again as the CEO, he dove into the company's internal data, analyzing employee wages, benefits, and operational costs. What he found shocked him. The numbers painted a grim picture. While the company raked in billions annually, frontline workers earned barely above minimum wage. Even with overtime, their salaries fell far below the living wage required to support a family in most areas. Benefits like health insurance and paid leave were either non-existent or prohibitively expensive. Worst of all, management bonuses had skyrocketed in recent years, widening the gap between executives and entry-level employees. Jonathan slammed his fist on the desk, anger bubbling inside him. How had he missed this? For years, he had trusted his team to handle payroll and human resources, assuming they would act in the best interest of the workforce. Instead, they had prioritized cutting costs and boosting profits, leaving employees to fend for themselves. The realization stung. It was his name on the company letterhead after all. Whether he liked it or not, he bore responsibility for these failures. With mounting evidence in hand, Jonathan began drafting a plan. He knew tackling the issue would require bold action, starting with transparency. He compiled photos, notes, and statistics from his undercover stint, organizing them into a presentation that left no room for denial. His goal was simple: shock the board of directors into understanding the human cost of their decisions. Only then could meaningful change begin. The final piece of the puzzle came when Jonathan revisited the topic of food waste. Through online research, he discovered several successful initiatives where corporations partnered with local shelters to donate unsold meals. Not only did these programs reduce waste, but they also strengthened community ties and improved public perception. Inspired, Jonathan reached out to a nonprofit organization specializing in food redistribution. Together, they drafted a proposal outlining how his company could implement a similar system nationwide. By the end of the week, Jonathan felt ready. The weight of what he had uncovered was heavy, but so was his resolve. He couldn't undo the years of neglect and hardship endured by employees like Mia, but he could take steps to ensure it never happened again. As he prepared to reveal his findings to the board, he thought about Mia's resilience and courage. She had taught him that true strength lies not in power or wealth, but in empathy and action. And now, armed with her story and countless others, he was prepared to fight for justice, not just for Mia, but for everyone who deserved better. That night, as he reviewed his presentation one last time, Jonathan allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. Change wouldn't come overnight, but every great movement started with a single step. And this was his chance to lead the charge. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Jonathan felt a mix of nerves and determination coursing through him. He had spent countless hours preparing his presentation, ensuring every detail was clear, concise, and impossible to ignore. The evidence he had gathered, the photos, notes, statistics, and personal stories was damning, and he knew it would force the board to confront uncomfortable truths. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about humanity. As he walked into the sleek conference room, he reminded himself why he was doing this. For Mia, for her siblings, and for all the hard-working employees who deserved better. The board members were already seated around the polished mahogany table, laptops open and coffee cups steaming. They greeted Jonathan with polite smiles, unaware of the storm he was about to unleash. "Good morning, everyone," he began, taking his place at the head of the table. His tone was calm but firm, setting the stage for what was to come. "Today, we're going to discuss something that's been weighing heavily on my mind. It's not an easy conversation, but it's one we need to have if we want to move forward as a company." With that, he dimmed the lights and started the slideshow. The first image appeared on the screen, a close-up of leftover food being tossed into a trash bag. "This is what happens at the end of every shift in our restaurants," he said, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "Perfectly good meals, wasted. Meanwhile, many of our employees are struggling to put food on their own tables." He clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of employee wages compared to living costs. "These are the salaries we pay our frontline workers. Notice anything? Even with overtime, they're barely scraping by." The room grew silent as the board members studied the numbers. A few exchanged uneasy glances, while others scribbled notes. Jonathan pressed on, sharing anecdotes from his time undercover. He recounted conversations with kitchen staff and waitresses, describing the sacrifices they made just to survive. Then came the moment he had been dreading but knew was necessary. He projected a photo of Mia rummaging through the dumpster, her face blurred for privacy. "This is one of our employees," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "She works tirelessly every day, yet she's forced to eat scraps from the trash to feed her family. Does anyone here think this is acceptable?" The reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief. One board member leaned forward, shaking his head. "Are you serious right now?" he asked, his tone incredulous. "How could this happen under our watch?" "That's exactly my question," Jonathan replied, his gaze unwavering. "We've built a multi-billion-dollar empire, yet we're failing the very people who make it possible. Our policies are broken, and it's time we fix them." He moved on to the next section of his presentation: solutions. Using data from successful corporate initiatives, he outlined a comprehensive plan to address the issues. First, he proposed raising minimum wages across all locations to match the living wage in each region. "Yes, it will cost us more upfront," he acknowledged, anticipating pushback. "But investing in our employees means lower turnover rates, higher morale, and better customer service. In the long run, it's a win-win." Next, he introduced the idea of implementing meal stipends for employees. Every worker would receive a small daily allowance to purchase meals during their shifts. Additionally, unsold food would no longer be discarded. Instead, it would be donated to local shelters through partnerships with nonprofit organizations. Not only will this reduce waste, but it will also strengthen our relationship with the communities we serve, he explained. "It's good for business and even better for humanity." Finally, Jonathan addressed benefits. He suggested expanding health insurance coverage and introducing paid parental leave, sick days, and tuition reimbursement programs. "These aren't luxuries, they're necessities," he emphasized. "If we want to attract and retain top talent, we need to offer competitive benefits that reflect our values." By the time he finished speaking, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. Gone was the casual indifference. In its place was a sense of urgency. Board members nodded thoughtfully, some jotting down ideas, others discussing potential challenges. Jonathan could see the gears turning. They might not agree on every detail, but they couldn't deny the need for change. After the meeting, Jonathan wasted no time putting his plans into action. Over the next few weeks, he worked tirelessly to implement the new policies. Teams were assembled to oversee the rollout of wage increases and benefit expansions. Contracts were signed with nonprofits to facilitate food donations. Marketing campaigns highlighted the company's commitment to social responsibility, earning praise from customers and media outlets alike. But Jonathan didn't stop there. Remembering Mia's story, he decided to reach out to her personally. He tracked her down after her shift one evening, inviting her to meet him at a quiet cafe near the restaurant. When she arrived, her expression was a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "What's this about, Jack?" she asked, using his undercover alias. Jonathan smiled warmly, extending his hand. "My name isn't Jack," he admitted. "It's Jonathan Hart. I'm the CEO of this company." Mia's eyes widened in shock, but before she could respond, he continued. "I went undercover because I wanted to understand what life is really like for our employees. What I saw, well, it changed. You changed me." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she listened to him recount everything he had done since discovering her secret. She learned about the policy changes, the food donation program, and the financial assistance being offered to struggling employees. "And there's more," Jonathan added softly. "I'd like to help you with your siblings. Full scholarships for Lila and Ethan, plus support for whatever else you need. You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." Mia sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the generosity of his offer. For so long she had fought to keep her family afloat, believing no one cared about her struggles. Now here was a man, a powerful, influential man, offering her a lifeline. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because it's the right thing to do," Jonathan replied simply. "You've shown incredible strength and resilience, Mia. You deserve a chance to thrive, not just survive. And I promise you, this is just the beginning." As they parted ways that evening, Mia felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she believed things could get better. And Jonathan, watching her walk away with renewed purpose, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had taken the first step toward creating a company that truly valued its people, and he knew it was only the start of something much bigger. Months passed, and the changes Jonathan had set in motion began to take root. The restaurant chain transformed not only in policy, but also in spirit. Employees who had once felt invisible now found themselves valued and supported. Wages increased, benefits expanded, and unsold food was donated daily to local shelters, feeding hundreds of families in need. The ripple effects of these changes were felt far beyond the walls of the restaurants. They reached into homes, schools, and communities, creating a wave of positivity that seemed unstoppable. For Mia, life improved dramatically. With the financial assistance provided by the company, she was able to move her family out of their cramped apartment and into a safer, more spacious home. Her siblings, Lila and Ethan, thrived under the stability. Lila joined an after-school art program where her creativity blossomed, while Ethan became the star player on his school's soccer team. For the first time in years, laughter filled their household without the looming shadow of worry. Mia herself felt lighter, freer. She no longer skipped meals or rummaged through trash bins. Instead, she enjoyed hearty dinners with her siblings, knowing they would never go hungry again. Jonathan kept tabs on Mia's progress, checking in regularly to ensure she had everything she needed. Their relationship evolved from CEO and employee to something resembling friendship. He admired her resilience and determination, qualities he believed the world needed more of. In turn, Mia came to see Jonathan not as a distant corporate figure, but as someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. "You didn't have to do all this," she told him during one of their meetings. "But you did, and I'll never forget it." "You're the one who inspired me," Jonathan replied sincerely. "If anything, I should thank you for opening my eyes." The impact of Jonathan's actions extended beyond individual lives. It reshaped the entire company culture. Morale soared among employees, leading to higher productivity and better customer experiences. Customers noticed the shift too. Social media buzzed with praise for the restaurant chain's commitment to social responsibility. News outlets featured stories about the CEO who went undercover to expose injustices within his own business, turning Jonathan into a symbol of ethical leadership. Competitors took note, some even following suit by implementing similar policies in their organizations. To celebrate these achievements, Jonathan organized a press conference at the same small-town restaurant where his journey had begun. Reporters packed the dining area, eager to hear the story behind the transformation. Standing beside him on stage was Mia, now promoted to assistant manager. She wore a crisp uniform, her confidence radiating as brightly as her smile. Together, they addressed the crowd, sharing their experiences and outlining the steps taken to improve conditions for employees. "Change starts with listening," Jonathan began, his voice steady yet passionate. "Too often we make decisions from ivory towers, disconnected from the realities faced by those on the ground. But when I stepped into their shoes, I saw things I couldn't ignore. I saw hardworking people struggling to survive despite giving their all every day. That's unacceptable, and it's our responsibility to fix it." Mia then spoke, her words heartfelt and powerful. "I used to think success meant working twice as hard for half the reward," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But thanks to Mr. Hart and the changes he's made, I've learned that success is about lifting each other up. It's about creating opportunities for everyone, not just a select few." The audience erupted in applause, moved by her sincerity and courage. As the event drew to a close, reporters swarmed Mia and Jonathan, asking questions about their partnership and the future of the company. One journalist asked Mia how she felt about being thrust into the spotlight. "Honestly?" She laughed softly. "It's surreal. But if sharing my story can help others realize they're not alone, then it's worth it." Another reporter turned to Jonathan, asking what advice he would give to other CEOs considering similar initiatives. "Don't wait for a crisis to act," he responded firmly. "Step outside your comfort zone. Listen to your employees. See the world through their eyes. You might be surprised by what you discover and inspired to make a real difference." The weeks that followed, the restaurant chain continued to thrive, earning accolades for its innovative approach to corporate responsibility. Scholarships funded by the company helped dozens of employees pursue education and career advancement. Food donation programs fed thousands, strengthening ties between the business and local communities. Employees reported feeling happier, healthier, and more motivated than ever before. For Jonathan, the experience marked a turning point in his life. No longer content to focus solely on profits, he dedicated himself to building a legacy rooted in compassion and integrity. He traveled to different branches of the company, meeting workers face to face and encouraging them to share their ideas for improvement. He established a foundation aimed at supporting low-income families, ensuring that no child would grow up hungry or deprived of opportunity. And yet, despite all the accolades and accomplishments, Jonathan remained humble. He knew the work was far from over. There were still challenges to address, systems to refine, and lives to touch, but he approached each day with renewed purpose, guided by the lessons he had learned from Mia and countless others like her. One evening, as he stood on the balcony of his penthouse, gazing out at the city lights below, Jonathan reflected on how much had changed since that fateful night by the dumpster. He thought about Mia's laughter, her siblings' smiles, and the gratitude in the eyes of employees who finally felt seen and heard. He thought about the power of empathy, the simple act of stepping into someone else's shoes and seeing the world through their lens. Most of all, he thought about the future, a future where businesses prioritized people over profits, where kindness triumphed over greed, and where everyone had a fair chance to succeed. It was a lofty vision, perhaps, but one worth striving for. After all, change always started with a single step, and Jonathan had taken his. As the city sparkled beneath him, Jonathan allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He had set out to uncover the truth and ended up igniting a movement. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its bumps, he knew one thing for certain: the best way to lead was with heart.